Welcome back. This is the second video of our series where we are showing how we can solve the Broken Azure challenge. It's a really fun challenge for beginners, and where we will also be showing how the challenges are set up to the best of our knowledge. Because as of now, we don't have access to the subscription as of yet. Later we will. But for now, we are going to try and replicate what's happening in the background based on what we have seen so far. In the first challenge, we were able to get the flag by looking at a storage account. There was an anonymously accessible container where we were able to list the files, the blobs on this container, and we were able to get the flag. So let's see how that looks like. So over here, I have my own subscription, and I'm going to try and replicate this and show you what it looks like in Azure. First things first, we want to create a storage account. If we are going to be using storage, we have to have a storage account. This is where all our files and folders are going to be created and stored. So I'm going to create a storage account over here. For the sake of this exercise, I'm going to create a separate resource group, and I'm going to call it Broken Azure, so I can put all my resources in it for this challenge and the future ones. And I'm going to give the storage account a name. If you remember from the previous video, the storage account was called Super Company Storage. So I'm going to try and replicate this, but you're going to notice that I get an error that says this name is already taken. With storage accounts, because they use public URLs, these URLs or these names have to be globally unique. I cannot use a storage name if somebody else has claimed it or used it, pretty much like a domain name. So if, for example, I have the domain name hackersacademy.com, nobody else should be allowed to use that domain name. It's owned by somebody, it's registered by somebody, that somebody owns it, and nobody else should be able to use it or own it. And the same thing happens with these storage accounts as well, right? So because the creators, the company called Secura is the creator of that CTF, they used Super Company Storage name, I cannot use that. So I'm just gonna put 2 over here just to take a similar name basically. And that's about it. For the rest of this, we're not going to go through each and every single option. Feel free to go through these on your own. I don't want to spend too much time on this. But for now, I'm just going to go with review. Once the review is done, I'm going to create the account. And once that is done, we're going to go to the resource. So over here, you can see that I have the option of containers under data storage. This is where I can start to create containers and upload my files. So I'm going to create the container. Remember, this was the first missing piece of information when we were trying to connect to the storage account. So the container here, I can go with whichever name, it doesn't matter. We're just going to go with the same name that we've seen in the CTF challenge, and I'm going to call it storage container. And you can see here in the access level, there are going to be different types of access. There's the private, there's the blob, and there's the anonymous. So what's the difference between these? Very quickly, private, as the name suggests, you cannot access it anonymously. You have to have some kind of authentication. It's not open for the public for anybody to access. The second option, the blob, which is anonymous read access for blobs only, means that if you have direct access to the blob or direct access to the file, you will be able to access it. But you cannot list the content of the container or the folder. The third option, the container, which is also anonymous access, means that anybody, if they have the name of the container, they can access the container and list its content. As if you have access over a folder, you can open the folder and see what's inside that folder. That's the difference between these 3 levels of access. So our setup is going to replicate the CTF environment, and the CTF environment allowed anonymous access, which is basically the container access level. So we're going to select that, and I'm going to create the container. Now that I have the container created, all that is missing is the files that needs to be uploaded. And I'm just going to upload basically the same files that I got from the CTF, where we had 3 files. We had an OpenVPN configuration file, we had a PNG logo file, and we had the PAM file as well. And we will see how we can use that a little bit later. Once these are uploaded, my job here is done. Now, how do I access this container? In the previous video, we saw a couple ways of doing that, either by using a PowerShell module or by directly accessing it using our browser or by using the Storage Explorer. Now let me show you what that looks like from the Azure portal. If I click on any of these files, you will see the direct URL. And I can take this URL and I can use it to access the resource that I want to. So if I paste this over here, what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to access the logo PNG file, which is basically going to download the file. You can see the name of the storage account. This is the name of the storage account. And you can also see the name of the container. So let's try to replicate what we've done in the previous video. Now that I want to use the enumerate Azure blobs, I have to define a base, which is basically the name that is going to be prepended to the URL while I try to enumerate these services or the blobs. And in my case, it's Super Company Storage 2. So I'm going to use that, and you can see that this returned a storage account that was found. Remember, what we did next was trying to use the Storage Explorer, but the one thing that was missing at that point in time was what? What was missing? The name of the container. So I can use the storage account, but without the name of the container, I'm not gonna be able to list the container. And we've seen in the previous video how we got that. So let's try to replicate this over here. I'm gonna paste the name of the container and I'm gonna connect. And here we go. Now we have access to the container. Now let's take a quick look on how we can fix this. As you would imagine, it's going to be an easy fix. If I don't want somebody to access the container anonymously, all I have to do basically is just change the access level. So over here, I can change it to private. So there is no anonymous access allowed. Now, obviously, there are certain situations where you want somebody to access this publicly. But in that case, you have to, of course, be careful not to put anything sensitive like private keys, like OpenVPN configurations, right? Of course, this is done for the sake of the CTF, but in real life, this is how quite a few breaches have happened in the past, and I'm sure will continue to happen. So now let's see what happens if I change the access level. I've changed this to private, and let's try to enumerate it again. Now, if we do the enumeration, here's what's going to happen. What do you expect? I'm going to pause the video here for a second, and I want you to think about this. What do you think now is going to happen when the enumeration finishes? Are we still going to find the storage account or not? What do you think? Will the enumeration find the storage account, or will the enumeration not find the storage account? Did you think about that? Let's see what's going to happen. It did find the storage account. Well, why did this happen? We just changed the level to private. We've denied access as anonymous, as public access. So how come we're still finding the storage account? Remember, what we changed was the access to the container, not to the storage account. The storage account will still have the URL valid and will still have the URL basically accessible over the web. Because like we've said, it's similar to a registered domain. So imagine this, if you have registered a website, you have registered a domain, but you have nothing hosted on this domain. Does that mean the domain doesn't exist? No, of course it exists. It's just that you're not hosting anything, or maybe you're not allowing anybody to access the hosted files. You've just kept this as a private website. Same concept here. The domain, quote unquote, which is the storage account name, the URL for the storage account, is registered, again, quote unquote. It is being used. So it's there. We can validate its existence, but there is nothing we can access on it. That's basically what private is doing. All right, so here, if I go back to my Storage Explorer and I refresh, you'll see that I cannot access the content. Even if I detach this, I disconnect from it, and I try to reconnect again, using anonymous, notice what happens now. I'm just gonna rename this to private container. Notice that, yes, the URL exists for the storage account, but there is no content I can access. And that is the difference between the levels of access on the containers. Keep that in mind. It impacts the container, not the storage account. With that, we reach the end of our video. In the next video, we are going to be seeing how we can go after the second flag. So now that we have gotten some files from the storage, what are we going to be doing with these files? How are we going to be using them? And what kind of access are we going to get? That's what's going to be shown in the next video. With that said, this is all from me for now, and I will see you soon in the next video.